Well done on sticking through Jay's talk. We will try not to let him keep going for the next hour for all the slides that he didn't cover. So we might have to cut him off at some points. We shall see. If you haven't been here before, my name is Robert Scott, and I help to lead a little church amongst Bangladeshi people in Tower Hamlets in East London called Asha, which means hope in Sylheti, and we say we're a community of hope in Jesus the Messiah. If you have been here before, you'll have heard some of these guys up front on the panel before, and so I'm not going to introduce you to them, but it would be good to hear from Odon and Mel, just the kind of introductory questions to get to know them a little bit. And the same introductory questions that I've asked each of the other guys before is, what do you love about Jesus, and what does church ministry look like for you? Mel, first. What do you love about Jesus, and what does church ministry look like for you?
Well, there's so much you could say about what I love about Jesus. Jesus is the most loving being that we know, the most loving person we know. And I would say we believe in Jesus, but I think we need to remember Jesus believes in us, even when we fail. And I think that's what I would take away.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. And what does church ministry stuff look like for you?
Effectively, it means giving up hours and hours of my spare time doing very tedious research for the greater good. That's what it means for me. It may not be directly person to person, but I'm hoping I can do something to give to other people that can run with it and talk to Muslims directly, and hopefully make a difference.
And certainly Jay is running with it a lot, so thank you for that. Odon, same question.
So what do I love about Jesus? I love a lot of things, but the easiest and the biggest one is that he saves me. He's my savior. He gives me life. Without Jesus, I am surviving. I'm living, but only surviving. But I'm not living the life. And what I love is that it's here for everyone to take. It's not just for me. And this is what I want to pass along to everybody.
Great.
As for the ministry, as a Catholic, it's kind of strange to sing things in terms of ministry. But I have the sort of equivalent. So I am engaged in studying Islam's origin, in the mission with Muslims. I'm also studying the origins of Christianity. For example, the datation of the Gospels. Jay, I would have something to tell you afterwards.
Save it for later.
It's much more earlier than you put it. Yeah. And we have evidence for it. The mission or the ministry would be to, I think it's St. Thomas Aquinas who put it this way, to teach the ignorant. Isn't it a sort of virtue or something, a mission for Christian? So maybe it's mine.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Now, Mel, we've talked this week about kind of the internal Islamic dilemma. We've talked about a cultural dilemma and challenge. How would you sum up, in less time than Jay, the Islamic historical dilemma?
Yeah. Let me just think about this. Well, I think it's essentially Muslims have a choice between the historical option and what I would call the hysterical option. You like that? There's an awful lot of absurdities in the Islamic narratives, and there is definitely a case to argue that might lead Muslims to leave Islam based on all the internal contradictions, and I say go for it. But there'll also be Muslims that will be persuaded by the argument that it all never happened. And I think as long as Muslims believe that there is some historical validity to all of this, they may leave Islam, but they're going to be back again in 6 months because the absurdity won't keep them out. They'll come back again, and we see that happening all the time. I have different contacts around the Middle East, and what I hear is it's the historical argument that makes them leave and they don't come back. So that's why I think it works. I don't know if I've answered the question about the dilemma, but I do think either way, the effect is the same. So it's either one or the other, but at the end, the result is what we want. You know?
Yeah. Jay, what would you add to that?
No, and I think he's correct. I think the historical argument is proving to be the easiest argument for people outside of Europe and the United States, because much of the other arguments are so controversial and in your face, we can't use them in Nigeria. You can't talk about Muhammad as a pedophile or the difficulties with his sexual proclivities or violence. You can't do that in Pakistan or India, even Indonesia. But you can talk about the historical critique as it's absolutely neutral. You can show everything I said today. Do you notice there was nothing hatred about it, and there was no Islamophobia. And so what they're asking me is this is what we can use. We can use the historical critique because it is neutral. Anybody can use it. And more than that, it's visual. Did you notice everything I did is on slides? Because it's timelines. We didn't even get into the coins. The coins are the most powerful argument. Or the inscriptions, those are as powerful. It's so visual, you can just show your Muslim friend and say, can you deal with this? How are you going to deal with these coins? They're metal. They don't disintegrate. They don't deteriorate. These are from the 7th century. This is your Muawiyah. Here's Abdul Malik. Look at his names on it. So when you do that, it takes the argument off your shoulders and puts it onto the evidence that you're showing them. It makes it a lot easier.
Why do you think, though, that many of us have never heard of this kind of thing until recently-ish? So at least 21st century. Why wasn't this kind of stuff being talked about before? Brackets. Have you just made it up?
Do you want me to answer?
And then Mel and Odon.
There's a very good reason. Blame the Germans. Basically, all this stuff is known in Germany. For those who are German, Dirk, shame on you guys. Why did you keep it there? The Germans have known about this since the 1920s. Goldziher and Schock, they were all dealing with this material. Volker Popp, they all knew this stuff, but they kept it in German because they didn't really want to bring it into the English-speaking world. Because you know what happens when you bring this stuff in? You don't live very long. It's not very healthy. And if you're an academic, you want to stay an academic. You don't want to have to deal with the hysteria of Islam. So that's why. It's been proven. For us, those of us who are in the English-speaking world, we're just gobbling it up and just putting it out there as fast as we can because so much of it's being released now.
Mm-hmm. Mel, would you?
Yeah, I suppose there's a lot of evidence that keeps cropping up, like coins get discovered. There's some coins that have only been discovered in the last few years. Things get dug up and so on. A lot of the Islamic sources have only recently been translated from Arabic, so we weren't aware of them as well. And as soon as we hear what is said in the Islamic sources, it certainly sparks my curiosity to find out why are they writing this stuff. But I think World War II had an effect, because before World War II there was a lot of scholarship going on, and then there was a big gap. There wasn't money being put into it, not a lot of interest, and really it was the 70s that kind of took off again. So it's taken a while, but the internet has changed everything. It's much easier now to do research. There is a problem in scholarship, is that scholars tend to be very isolated people. They may have like a gold mine in their hand and they don't share it with each other, and that's true even with scholars in an era. But the internet helps, so people can download articles and read them and then share them, and it's so much easier. So I would say that's the reason why the last 5 years in particular it's taken off exponentially.
Could I make a supplementary comment? Just with regards to academia, I think we also need to be aware that there is an emerging fear in the academic world to really challenge the sin, and there's almost an acquiescence to the sin in the standard Islamic narrative, S-I-N, the sin, standard Islamic narrative. And what we seem to be seeing in a lot of academic circles is just acquiescence to the standard Islamic narrative that is not necessarily interrogating it with the same ferocity with which Christianity was interrogated. And we should all push back against that cowardice.
Thank you. Now, Don, would you like to just add anything? And also, just to say, what scholars have you found particularly helpful that we could go away and look at ourselves?
Just to add something to what you three have just said, there were some groundbreaking scholars in the beginning of the 20th century. People like Henri Lamens, I've talked about him in one of my exposés, or people like Alphonse Mingana. And thanks to them, the knowledge of Islam leaped forward. It was a tremendous progress, but they were silenced by, at least for Henri Lamens, by the church. Henri Lamens was a Jesuit, and he proved that the Islamic narrative was a fabrication and a lie, and it was his superiors forbade him to keep on with his studies. And it's such a waste. And if you look into the study of early Islam, there's been this, in the early, up until the Second World War, there was lots of progress being made, and thereafter a sort of period of 30 to 40 years of sleepiness, and nothing more going on up until the critical school of Wansbrough, Patricia Crone, and so on. And thereafter came the internet, and internet changed everything because it allowed for scholars to network much more efficiently, and it allows a sort of Uberization of the research. For example, Mel or UJ, what you're doing with your channels is that you have people from all around the world, thousands of brains and more, that are searching. Okay, they are not scholars, most of them are amateurs, but they are brains nonetheless. And they came up with ideas. And internet, with the networks that it allows, changes everything.
Thank you. Now, Chris, we had you on the first panel, kind of Islam dilemma, contradictions, problems within texts themselves. How much do you use this, and do you prefer the kind of more internal over this? If so, why or why not?
I don't. I like to think the internal and the historic can work together very well. In fact, I think that's a really good holistic way of taking down Islam. I think that, for my paradigm, if you can show to a Sunni Muslim, for example, that their traditions, the Sunnah, the narrations of Muhammad, the biography of Muhammad is false, there are serious errors in it that we can give good reasons academically to believe are wrong, they are mistakes, they aren't true, then at that point, what have you done? You've just shown that Sunni Islam is false. If you could show Bukhari didn't know what he was talking about and has errors, where do you go from that? If you can show the science of the hadith is in error, well then how do you know who Muhammad was? And at that point you've done it. I think you've already cracked the code at this point. Everything else is just the icing on the cake. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoy using these, and I think there's a lot of license to how we employ them and how they relate to the internal critique. So.
Thank you. How do you think, not simply us here who've kind of been hearing everything these last 3 days, but Christians back in our churches that we want to encourage and engage with these things, what, not sound bites, but sound bites and more than sound bites, can we help them with, particularly from the historical critique, that can start and carry on conversations with Muslim people, do you think?
I'm a big believer in pictures. So I think a picture says 1,000 words. Maps are brilliant, really easy to understand. The coins are great. So you can just, one coin can do the work for you. And like, it doesn't really require that much work. So if you can go away with just one coin that you know really well, you know what the pictures symbolize, what the words mean, you can do an awful lot of good there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. A coin?
Mary Barry is sitting right there. Do you have any of your flashcards with you? Mary Barry, when we go to Nigeria, she goes all over Nigeria and gives out these flashcards that have, each page has a slide from my PowerPoints. And she hands it to people, and they just sit there and show it to their Muslim friend. What about this? What about this? What about that? They don't even have to know the argument because it's all so visual. And they just, and in Nigeria, it really works that way. And so these are people who've never even heard the argument. They may have heard it one time, they are starting to use it now with their families. They're starting to use it with other people in their villages. That's one way you can do it. So, because you can't memorize all that stuff, there's too much material. Just use the PowerPoints. Just use the slides and gloss them so they can't tear them up. Laminate them so they can't tear them up. And they won't. And she's been handing them out. In fact, they keep on grabbing it. They want more. So every time we go back, we're going to have to send a whole slew of them to over there in Nigeria. So if it works in Nigeria, it'll work in Kenya. It'll work in Ethiopia. It'll work in Indonesia. It'll work all over the Muslim world. And if it works in the Muslim world, it'll also work in this world.
Thank you. Yeah. What else would people add to that in terms of something simple to help us?
I think that the using the literature to talk about the descriptions of Mecca and then expressing how that is not sustained by Mecca's geography is a very simple, self-contained, easy to work, easy to remember argument. And in some ways, yeah, I think that's it's one of the points upon which I agree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For my part, I think what is useful is the most easy to use material. So pictures, things around Mecca that relates to geography or climate that are really, really, really easy to understand. Mm-hmm. Because if you come to Quranic studies, even manuscripts, it's so complicated. Most of the Muslims don't read Arabic, for example, so there's no use showing them manuscripts with a different version of the Quran. So you have to use the easiest stuff. And coins are, even the coins with Muhammad and the cross, they are not that easy to use. I have had many critics from Muslims telling me, no, okay, there's a cross, but it's still a Muslim coin, because they had to accommodate for Christian and so on, and they invent stories in order to accommodate for Islam. And it taught me a lesson. This was the conclusion of my presentation here, is that research into history is important. It's very important, but it won't reach Muslims in numbers. It will reach Muslims who are already asking themselves questions. It will reach non-Muslims, but it only will reach a few Muslims. But history teaches us about the spiritual drive of Islam, the messianic frenzy of the 7th century, who was sort of disguised into Islam by the creation of its narrative. It's still there in Islam, and we can identify it now with all this research. We know it comes from Christianity and from certain Jewish ideas also. We know it comes from the idea of collective salvation. And this we can address now. And because we know that it is historically at the core of Islam. It's not an invention from the 17th or 18th century or from the Muslim Brotherhood. It's there since the beginning of Islam, since even before Islam named itself, it's Islam. And this is something very, very interesting and I think very effective.
Thank you. Chris, what would you say? If one or two things to help regular Christians on this to kind of share with Muslim friends?
Yeah, I think everything that's been raised here is kind of made the point that the fact that you can't really deny history, it's a universal language. And when you raise that with people, they're forced with the brute reality that, you know, if Mecca wasn't this pagan city that has the population and the pilgrimage that it's supposed to have, if the vegetation doesn't match, if the stories don't match, kind of looks like the Muhammad that the Sunni Muslims believe in isn't really there. And if he isn't there, Islam is false, isn't it?
Yeah. And
that's kind of it, really, in a nutshell.
Thank you. We, on our weekly book table that we do in one of the markets in Tower Hamlets, we've got, one guy's got T-shirts made up saying, "Show me the evidence." He's also going to make T-shirts up saying, "No water, ask me about it," and see where that goes. You'd be pleased.
Can I add something? I think research into the history of Islam is also very important for ex-Muslims. Because once they have left Islam, they are left also with a dilemma. Was I right to leave Islam? because the prophet, how could the prophet utter the Quran? How could something as huge as Islam come out of something as barren as Mecca? And the truth about history is a huge relief for them, a huge relief.
Yeah, thank you, that's really true. Now, Bob, Jay set you up at the end of his talk by saying you disagreed with everything and you were wrong. What dangers can you see, though, with basing an approach to Muslim people solely on this?
Yeah, it is a Daif report from Jay that I was boasting that I was gonna shut you all down. That wasn't at all.
Have you seen how he's already acquiesced?
No, Daif.
Keep going.
So anyway, there's a number of dangers with this. One is that it's kind of in terms of argument, it's giving a loaded gun into the hands of children. This is a highly academic argument, and it needs to be processed in a highly academic way. And through no fault of anyone, unless you're a trained historian, unless you familiarize yourself with the historical process and how we investigate history, it can be mishandled and very easily flipped on you. I think, and this is one of my issues with this argument, is that I do think that in places, what it will do is it will repopularize certain Muslim arguments that were defeated. You know, and not because...
Such as?
I'm perfectly going to give an example. And not because it is the intention of people on this panel to do so, but rather because people will pick up a little bit of information but not understand the full context, and so it will re-inflame an argument. An example would be the idea of Mahmed being a reference to Jesus. Now, I fully understand what Mel and Jay have argued. I get what they've argued. It's a very nuanced line of argument. But as that filters out, that's going to re-inflame the whole idea that indeed Muhammad is referenced in the Gospel of John.
Or Song of Songs.
Yeah, or in the Song of Songs. It's going to re-inflame that idea. And lots of young Christians who can't marshal the argument well, who don't understand it well, are going to find themselves tripped up because they're going to hear you and not understand you say that Mahmed is referencing Jesus, think that, oh, well, there you go, that's what it says, and you made your point very well. But then they're going to hear the Muslims say, well, that proves, look, even your Christian friends are saying this is referencing, this is a reference to Mahmed, and it'll inflame that argument, and I think it's going to trip up a lot of Christians who are novices because it's too complex. You need to know a lot of history to marshal this argument well.
Thank you. So, Mel, then Jay.
Yeah, I think as people who are searching for the truth, I think truth should come before winning arguments, because you could win an argument with something that's false. And I also think you really need to treat Muslims as adults, well, the Muslims who are adults. So I think we have to trust them. And yeah, it's possible that it might weaken the argument, but I think we have to think in centuries here. I think that when the concept of Mahmed pre-existing Muhammad gets out there and filters down, it's going to kill that argument as well, you know.
But for instance, you made the case extremely well, and I fully support the idea that Mahmed is a title. But as you know, titles can also become names. So it's not impossible that the term Mahmed actually becomes the name of an Arab warlord who thinks himself a prophet, and he has that as a name, even though before it was a title. You know, there's other examples of titles becoming names all through history in all kinds of cultures. And so just pointing out the fact that it is a title doesn't mean that it can't also become someone's name.
But let me take this on real quick. Absolutely, no one's suggesting it doesn't. The difficulty is, even if it does become a name, look where they're located. Gaza, Damascus, Herat. Look and see, these are all in places, Syria and in Lebanon in Iraq. So regardless of who it is, it's not the Muhammad of Islam. That's all I'm saying. That's all we're saying. We're not saying that Muhammad as a warrior, listen, almost any leader of men called themselves prophets in the 7th century. That's quite normal. And they would use the title Muhammad, the praised one, to aggrandize themselves. So it's all over the place. It just so happens that when Christians were writing about it, and that's the only ones we really have access to, they were writing about specific occasions. And take a look and see where all these places were. They're way up in the north. So it's not the Muhammad of Islam. That's all we're saying. Yes, which Muhammad are you referring to? So, coming and going, we've got that point down. Now, as far as you're saying, what if people mishandle this? Everybody's going to mishandle it at some point. But that's not going to negate the argument. How many people heard the Muhammad argument for the first time here today? Raise your hands. How many of you who heard it for the first time, did you understand it? Most of you. It's not a difficult argument to understand. But more than that, even if you don't want to give it to the children and those who are young, give it to the experts and the people who are actually going to argue it. Because you say it's academic, then fine, use it academically if you want to, and confront the Muslim academics. That's all I'm asking. Keep it at academic level and let it filter down in the church in time. Because at some point we've got to make sure that we have this narrative and that we're on the offense on this, so that we define that the Muhammad they're looking for is not the Muhammad they find. And the Muhammad they're looking for, remember what I said, you have to fulfill all 4 criteria to make it your Muhammad. It's nothing more than a title for someone else.
Chris, then Bob.
I was just going to say, the fact that there could be other things referenced to by Muhammad or Muhammad as opposed to just being specifically about one person just gives more license and more scope to the idea that the traditions can be an error. Because they could have got it from other things more legitimately, and this is a way of potentially explaining that. And that's why I think it's powerful. That's my take on it.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm not here to be an apologist for the sin. So for the Christian who wants to defend sin.
Isn't it great that we have to be an apologist or a confidant of sin? Isn't it great that we can use that word?
But the point is, I guess what I'm trying to say is, and based on the presentations that I've heard from Odon, from Mel, from you, Jay, I have least problem with you, Jay. Least problem with you. Because you're simply knocking down the sin. I start to develop nervousness, intellectual nervousness, when I hear Odon and I hear Mel, because I feel that you guys are asserting alternative narratives to which there is as little evidence as there is to the sin of Islam, and I'll try to express what I mean by that. So with you, Mel, I kind of see you like a Hoover. You're looking, you're scouring the region, and you've tapped into a thread, and then you're looking, and you've got an idea, and then you're looking for evidence that seems to fit with idea, and you're pulling it in from all around the region, and then you're constructing an alternative history. And if I just want to make sure I understand it right, it's this idea that Islam emerged from a Jewish messianic cult. Is that fair?
It would be only a partial.
Only partial, fair enough. Okay, so I've still got some learning to do on my part. And with you, Odon, it is particularly the Nazarenes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who were Jewish.
Yeah.
Who were a cult.
Mel, do you believe that it was the Nazarenes?
I would say it's part of the jigsaw. It's
No,
much bigger.
no, I didn't ask you that. Odon seems to be that it is the Nazarenes. Do you think it is the Nazarenes?
I'm keeping an open mind on the method by which Christians and Jews dovetailed into something called Islam. It could be a group, or in terms of a micro group like the Nazarenes, or it could be some other reason. And the evidence does lend towards Odin's point of view, but I'm still open, and it's the best hypothesis I've heard so far. But in the nature of a scientific methodology, you go with the evidence and you come up with the best hypothesis. I do want to respond, if I can, with what Bob has said. So, if I understood you correctly, you kind of essentially said that I'm basically doing the same thing as the Muslims are doing. So let's just think about this. What Muslims are asserting is entirely based on hearsay. Someone heard from someone who knew a man with a dog whose uncle knew the grandfather, blah, 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 and it goes on and on and on like that. So that's hearsay. The approach that I do is I scour all of the data. I go down cul-de-sacs, I get dead ends, but I do have an agenda, which is to find out the truth. And then I look to see what the pattern is. If you go to a doctor with a bad tummy ache, the doctor will say, "Did you eat anything funny recently?" "Yeah, well, there was a bit of fish I ate that was gone off." The doctor will say it's probably the fish. And you might be saying, "Well, is that the truth?" The doctor might say, "Well, I don't know if it's true, but it's probably the best hypothesis." And so my task is to try and come up with the best hypothesis. For the life of me, I can't think of a hypothesis by which you have a prophet down in the Hijaz with zero population, no water, no culture, who's not able to read and write, who comes out all this amazing material that all comes from the north. The only way I could come up with a hypothesis in which that works is I would have to become a Muslim, because I'd have to believe in a miracle by which this guy got all the revelation. I can't go with that.
So is there a sense then that as useful as we're saying the historical critique can be, that there is a sense in which we are kind of humbly, tentatively holding it out to people rather than saying this is definitely what happened? So like a good academic would do, is that?
Let me answer this, and I'll answer your question simultaneously. And then I'll give it to Odon. Do you notice I purposely did not do a green paper on this? I let these guys jump into the white paper and go beyond the white paper. White paper is what the government does whenever it puts out an idea and they want it to release it to the newspapers so that everybody can bellyache and they can find out what works and what doesn't work. What most of us are doing, and you can ask all my MAPI students, I don't tell you what actually happened. I don't dare go down that route. I saw what happened to Patricia Corona when she wrote Hagerism. And she decided but in her first page she said this is a what-if scenario. I'm not ready to say what actually happened. I won't go down that route. You won't hear me say that. Odon and Mel have really taken that on, and you have to give them the credit for doing that, because Muslims will hammer them, and so will the academics, as you're hammering them, because they dare to say this is what happened, or this is a possible scenario of what happened. And that's why we must be careful that we don't say that yet. I don't think we're ready to say that.
I agree, but I feel when I listen to the presentations of Mel and Odon, they're presenting it much more factually than the evidence permits.
Because everybody asks that question. That's the first question. So how did it happen?
You can say you don't know.
I always say that. What do you think I do?
Yeah, well, that's why I've got less problem with you.
I say talk to Odon and talk to Mel.
Odon, you wanted to respond.
Just one thing, or maybe two. My hypothesis is not that the Nazarenes that are described in the Quran are the only factor for the origins of Islam. Islam is something complex. I think the Nazarenes were very influential for the Arab factions that took Jerusalem and rebuilt the temple and so on. But Islam is a composite also. And so Christianity was very important. Other Arab factions were very important. Manichaeism was very important. Persian religions were very important also. And in the end, when you look at the Islamic narrative, there is a sort of a complex mosaic of things. But I keep on thinking that the backbone of it is the idea of collective salvation through the enforcement of God's kingdom on earth. And I will stick to it. This is the spiritual drive of Islam. And it's a spiritual drive of today's Islam too. And we have to address it.
Yeah, thank you. Go on, Chris.
Just to jump in real quickly, I have to ask, but do we think there is an issue with having competing theories for what actually is the true historical account?
I think if you have competing theories about what the historical account is, it should alert you to the fact that the evidence is not clear. If you've got different competing theories and you're all using the same evidence, then that means there is an interpretation of the evidence going on, because the evidence is not sufficient to force an interpretation upon you. And usually when you're doing history, what you do is you look at all the facts that you can find that are relevant to the thing that you're examining, and then you come up with the hypothesis that explains all the facts without ignoring any evidence and without distorting any evidence. And so, for instance, I don't know if you've done this, Jay, I don't know the answer myself, but you referenced how late the hadiths were, the extant manuscripts. Perfectly valid point. Have you gone away and looked at the earliest extant tasfirs of the hadiths to see if you can find any early extant tasfirs upon the hadiths? Because I don't know if it's true, I don't know, but you may find some that predate the earliest extant hadith manuscripts.
We've done on every one of the 5 genres that I put up there, all 5 genres, we have gone through what the Muslims claim are their. Remember, there are many that are popping up all over the world, and you find out that they come from Timbuktu from the 14th century, or they come up from Iraq from the 19th century. Some of them were just written in the last century, but they attribute them back.
Have you researched the earliest extant manuscripts of the commentaries upon the hadiths? Do you know the earliest dates of the extant manuscripts of commentaries upon the hadiths? Because if those commentaries predate the earliest hadith manuscripts, then you have evidence that those manuscripts existed earlier than the extant manuscripts.
So you're talking
themselves.
another genre. You're talking about Dawi, Jama'at-Shari,
But this is the point. You're creating a historical argument, so you have to consider.
Define what you mean by earliest commentaries. Who are they? Give me some names. Who are the commentaries?
Right, hold on one second.
Wait,
the fact that you all heard and you saw how bad I am with names. Like, I've demonstrated that in front of you all publicly on how bad
Give
with
me
names.
one name of one commentary that you refer
Can I
to.
give you a name?
Go, Chris got one.
Wait, can I give a name?
Go, Chris.
Muqatil ibn Sulaiman, the earliest manuscripts we have of tafsir. Because I've heard.
Tafsir is 1236. That's 13th century.
Okay, that's how you. Because
listen, the commentaries don't even start to appear. You know this until the 11th century. So you're not going to have anything earlier than the 11th century.
Are you talking about commentaries of the Quran or commentaries of the Hadith?
Commentaries are of the Quran. That's all they are.
No, that's not true. This is my point.
Okay,
there are
then give me a name of which one you're
upon
referring
the
to.
Hadiths.
What commentary of the Hadith are you referring to? Give me a name.
Right, I will have to go and research that.
So let's park that for a minute. What is your is the argument that these are all late because they're extant and couldn't be copies of earlier manuscripts we don't have? Is the argument against that because we should have them? Because of parchment, vellum, Ottoman Empire, Abbasid Empire?
Absolutely, both end.
So it's because we should have them and we haven't.
Because of who they are and where they were, and also what they had that was available to them. Most Muslims are not even aware that every one of these tafsir and the tahriq and the hadith and the sirah compilers were working in the caliphal courts. And they were mostly either in Damascus or in Baghdad. Let's just throw away Damascus, we don't have any, but from Baghdad on. So that's why we're saying, why aren't they there? Mm-hmm. Because there's no excuse. They're all written on vellum, they're written on parchment. But, it's fascinating to me that we're the first to have ever done that, even asked this question, and we're the first to have done the research on it. Why hasn't this been researched by the Muslims?
Can I ask another question? Have you compared other literature from the Middle East to find out earlier extant manuscripts? So, for example, in preparation for this, I looked at the earliest complete extant manuscript of the Gospels in Armenia. Armenia became a Christian country in 301 AD. If my very cursory research is sound, the earliest extant manuscript of the New Testament in Armenia is from the 7th century. What the heck's going on there? It's one of the earliest Christian kingdoms, and yet, again, I only briefly looked into this, so I could be proven wrong, but the earliest extant manuscript of the New Testament is from centuries later. It would appear that perhaps the Middle East, generally as a region, perhaps had different attitudes to document preservation than the Romans.
Yeah, and I would suggest, if you look at most of the references that we did, the four that I put up there, the Flyleaf, the Thomas the Presbyter, Nikiu, Sabaeus, all those are 7th century. Those have been dated, except for Nikiu, they are dated from the 7th century. Why is it the Christians have all the references there? Why is it they have the documentation that have been attributed, and those are attestable?
Because we had an institutional church. We had an institutional church that prized the idea of maintaining its documents, whereas in Islam, there never was a single institution that covered the whole of the Islamic world. Sahih al-Bukhari wasn't even popularized until a century after his death. In his own lifetime, he was seen as a deviant. And then a century later, he starts to become popularized. But there isn't a singular institution to back that popularization, because that's just not how the Islamic world worked.
Well, it does work that way. I mean, just look how the Quran was put together. What do you think the story of Uthman is? And why is it Uthman? And they had to take the manuscripts of Hafiz's copy and redo it into 5 different copies. So this is a tradition.
But you
that
believe
tradition
that's
has been there, according to their traditions, since 652.
But it's their kind of thinking of why they should do it. So it does work as a historical argument.
Right. So I will address that because it's a fair point. But the thing is, I think in terms of the Quran, they see it as the word of God, right? Assuming, and I'm not here to defend the sin, but assuming that narrative about the Quran is correct, they see it as a holy document, whereas the hadiths, they don't. Now, you said that, you suggested at least, or implied, that the hadiths were all sort of created by possibly Bukhari, but we don't really know who made them. They were projected backwards and they were published much later, 12th and 14th century. The idea that someone would just invent these documents and no one would challenge that.
Did I say that? Remember what I said today. I'm actually saying what Odon said earlier.
Yeah.
They didn't just invent them. They actually deleted and accreted and deleted and accreted and manipulated and changed it depending on what the needs were of that day. And they destroyed what they no longer wanted. So there may have well been an al-Bukhari who did write something in the 9th century, who did exist in Baghdad to write that. There may have been a Muslim and all these other hadith writers. What we're saying is, along the way, people did not like what they said, or they needed to say something different because of the political problems that were happening, and they attributed it back to al-Bukhari. So that what we finally get, the final corpus of al-Bukhari, the 9 volumes that we have today, were only created in the 15th century, redacted back to the 9th century al-Bukhari. So the problem is, where are you? You have to go back to what we have in our hands today, and that's the dating we look.
Well, I think whilst that is certainly a good way to approach things, I think you're too radical about it. To simply go, like, we have to say that this was a projection back because we only have the material from the 15th century. What I'm trying to point out to you is, if someone was radically, firstly, how is there no other surviving fragments? How would they have managed to destroy?
Okay, here we go.
Wait, let me finish.
This is a good question.
Let me finish. Because this is in the Ottoman period now. How would they have managed to destroy every copy of Sahih al-Bukhari, both public and private, both in mosque and in home, in school and everywhere else, and nobody raise a protest? Nobody say, look, why are you deleting this version of Sahih al-Bukhari?
So why is there? Yeah, go for it, Jay.
Real quickly, where are these other documents that we're referring to? Why is there none that exists? Bingo.
Can I jump in?
Go on,
just to add a little.
The fact that you're assuming
Adoni's coming in.
Nobody mentions
the fact that you're assuming a huge corpus of al-Bukhari. Show me one example.
Adon, you'll go.
Just want to add my personal touch, my grain of salt. In the 13th century, there was a huge event. Mongols came in and they destroyed everything. Baghdad was leveled. Nothing was left. So it might be an argument for helping us understand why the Ottomans had it so easy to redo everything.
Yeah.
Let me say another way. Another way to answer that is to go to the Sitta. Take a look at the 6 manuscripts what's his name?
Gilliam.
Wistenfeld had to use. When he went back to the Fez document, which is the oldest, which is the furthest away from all the European documents, when he went to the Fez document, he only used 25% of it and threw out the other 75% because it didn't agree with the other sittas that were found in the 13th, 15th, and up into the 16th century. So right there, he had to do a manipulation of the text that he had in his hand. Why is it no one has gone back to the Fez document and compared it with the SOAS, with the Bodleian, with all the other 5 documents to see how much different they are? Because no one's bothered to do that yet.
Someone should do that.
Well, therefore, that's why I'm saying, can you imagine? We're going to now show that there were probably not just one sitta. We could probably come up with 6 different sittas.
Yeah, but I mean, also, I think, to be fair, Jay, sometimes you get a little excited. And referencing...
So do we all.
Referencing, throwing out these ideas like, the Quran was only written in 1924, and it was a German that put together the biography of Muhammad.
Have I ever said the Quran was written in 1924?
No,
is he misquoting me now?
It's a bit of a ruse. It's a bit of a ruse to even imply that it was a German that was... The German simply compiled material from something else. He acted as an editor, not as an author. And so it's important to make that distinction. Again, if we're going to make these arguments very academic, let's be academic about it.
Oh, on a popular level, though, people love it when I say, isn't it fascinating? The whole life of Muhammad comes from a German.
Yeah, but it's
not so
true.
nice to say that.
Not true.
Just to stick with Germany for a minute, how is this similar or not with 19th century German liberalism attacking the Bible and seeking the real Jesus of history versus Jesus of faith? How is it similar or different to that, do you think?
Well, I could go on that for an hour.
I'll go for Mel first.
What about Odon?
I will put it very simply. It's a house built on rock and the house built on sand. And Christianity passed the test, and Islam is failing the test.
Mm-hmm.
So guess which one is built on rock and which one is built on sand.
Mm-hmm.
I would maybe say, when you investigate Islam's story, you constantly come up against counter-evidence all the time. So I can understand, perhaps I'm guilty of going too far ahead. I'm a maverick, I'm a bit like that. But it's also the case that we're coming against counter-evidence constantly. Whereas if you investigate the Bible, Christianity, you constantly get supporting evidence. It's backed up. And that's kind of reassuring. The more you actually find counter-evidence, the more your suspicions are raised. Whereas if you get confirming evidence, the more your trust level goes up. And that's just human nature, I suppose.
Thank you. Just practically on this, to push it a bit more, how does this not get heard as skepticism about everything? We can't know anything.
I don't understand the question.
So we are so skeptical about Islamic history. How can we be trusting any history we have?
Well, the reason we're skeptical about Islamic history as we understand it is because precisely it's based on narrations. It's based on the idea that someone told someone that told someone something, and that is a reliable way because enough people said it and they were top-notch guys, we can trust them, and hence you can believe that's a thing. What we're getting at is there's a better way of doing this, which is actual sources. Like Jay, in your presentation, you listed the sources. These are actual things that we can see and we can read, and we can see them describe Muhammad and the circumstances about him, for example, and that can give us information, and that is more in line with a historical approach. So it's not trying to underline it.
No.
If I may, I started out in all of this 90% accepting everything, and it literally was only because I was forced to ask questions that my skepticism was raised. I read Al-Bukhari from beginning to end. About halfway through it, apart from being completely bored, I realised that this doesn't feel real. You know, just a vague sense of this sounds... Actually, Harry Potter is much more believable, you know?
I think I agree with Odon in the sense of, you know, when we put both Muhammad and Jesus into the acid bath, Jesus comes out looking like Jesus, whereas they put a Muhammad into the acid bath, and it definitely isn't the sin. I just think that, for instance, like with regards to the traditions about Muhammad, it's clearly not the Muhammad of the traditions that existed. But to go far as to say that, you know, there wasn't that there wasn't someone who was an Arab, who was a warlord, who believed himself to be a prophet, who brought revelation, even if that revelation was later edited. And one of the evidences to this, which I think is a very good point, is the Shia-Sunni split. Now, the thing is, religions tend to have a birth in something traumatic. You know, there is something that kicks off a religion's beginning. For us as Christians, it's the resurrection. For Shiism, it was the betrayal of Ali, and it was the killing of his relative Hussein. And that has a kernel of truth in it. And if that has the fact that the Shia exist, and the fact of the Shia narratives and the Shia story, their birth story, indicates that there is some truth to the overall Muslim story about this warlord who, maybe by title or by name, is called Mahdi.
Can I jump in real quick? But all that would establish is Islam is still false, because it's not the...
I'm not trying to defend the sin.
But my point, though, is that aren't we all in agreement here? I struggle to see where the actual major point of difference is. Because you're trying to say, look...
I'm saying that you need to be more cautious, and I'm saying that you need to investigate questions that you haven't investigated, because you're trying to make an academic argument, and what you're doing is you're pushing it out as a popular tabloid. And the thing is, this argument is a tricky argument precisely because it's a historical one.
Chris?
I'm not sure. I don't know where to go with that. It seems to me that we can say quite confidently that Muhammad of the sin doesn't exist, and you agree with that. Your point is that, well...
does he agree with that?
Yeah, he does.
No, you don't think Muhammad of the sin existed, right? Not of the standard
So
Islamic
I believe, so I'll tell you where I stand so far, so you can see where I stand. I believe that there was an Arab warlord who emerged out of the Arabian Peninsula, who believed himself to be a prophet, and who brought new revelation that we now know as the Quran. Now, that might have gone through an editing process, it probably did, and that there are some traditions about him, you know, that there is a kernel of truth contained within the traditions about him. Not that these traditions can be relied on in the same way that we might rely on the Gospels, but that there really was a person called Muhammad.
Okay. Can we just? How many people agree with Bob? Just see a raise of hands. Okay, so you got about a third of the people here. How many disagree with Bob? Okay, so about equal. So you all believe that, who raised your hands, that there was a man, a warlord from the when you say Arabian, you mean Mecca?
It's a tricky one.
When you say Arabian Peninsula.
So let's look at that. Let's look at that. Like, I certainly don't believe that the traditions that describe Mecca make sense, given everything that we know. But the idea that perhaps a religious shrine was established, and a little settlement, possibly, even a settlement that was only occasionally inhabited during pilgrimages, you know, could have existed.
Okay, let's go.
And
do you believe whoever it is, the kernel of the Quran came from him?
Yeah.
Or what about all those theological debates in the Quran between Christians and Jews, which the Quran is replete with, right?
Yeah.
Were there any Christians and Jews living in the Hijaz in the 7th century?
So we can do so.
Let me just answer this: were there any Christians and Jews living that far south to have had those debates?
No.
Then how could you have the Quran? How can you have those debates in the Quran?
Is it possible that someone who might have been born and lived in the Hijaz, or maybe Medina, or somewhere in that general region, even if it's not exactly the Kaaba, could have travelled and interacted with Jews and Christians and remembered their stories and those interactions?
That's more in line with Stephen Shoemaker's thought.
How many people lived in Yathrib in 7th century?
I'm not making any claims.
200 people lived in Yathrib.
That's a village.
Thank you. Exactly.
Yeah, but it's
Mecca
a
wasn't there,
settlement.
but Yathrib. So out of a 200-person
How-
village,
how
a man
far-
created a book that has all this sophisticated theology because he took a travel. He went way up to. He'd have to go to Nabatean Aramaic area, which is Jordan, to even get that Arabic. To get the Talmud Buta, the Aleph Maksura, all the grammatical. The grammatical reflection of the Arabic that's there.
All
It's
that
in the
would
wrong part of the
require is
world.
that is where it was written.
Wait,
Chris,
wait.
oh, John.
It's being recorded. We're going to be dealing with all this as speakers.
All that requires, Jay, is that it is written that far north, not that it was taught
Can I
that far north.
jump
Chris,
in?
then Adam, yeah.
Very quick.
Absolutely.
I think this is really reconcilable quite easily. Well, you both seem to be sort of saying the same thing. I mean, you could have, like Bob is saying, maybe there was someone who had a name somewhat like Muhammad who did think he was a prophet, who did do so-and-so and was a warlord. Maybe he was born in Mecca or somewhere around there, but he didn't really spend any of his time there, and he spent more of his time up north. Maybe there was some desire to conquer Jerusalem, for example, and he learned all the things there up north, which explains
Chris, where is your evidence that anybody lived in Mecca that early?
No, my point is that I can entertain the possibility that Mecca is a village, it's nowhere, it has no vegetation, it's barely anything. I can deny the Kaaba, I can deny the pilgrimage, I can do all that, and just say maybe there was a guy who was born there but moved. We don't need to be so explicit about this. If we destroy Mecca of the sin, we've destroyed Islam. We don't need to go further than that.
Yeah.
So we can compromise
John's next.
and have a very we can synthesize what you're both saying, I think. And I think it still means Islam is false.
Yeah.
And we have the freedom to be able to look at both of these perspectives and entertain either one. And either way, Islam is false. And I think that's the great fact that we're in that position right now.
I'm going to give Odon the last word on this and draw a line in a minute, but Odon, go.
Another grain of salt. Apart from the geographical issues, there is something here that seems to pass unchecked, unchallenged. It's the idea that someone could wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to create a new religion. This is complete nonsense. This doesn't exist. Jesus, for example, Jesus didn't create a new religion because he relied on an anthropology, an history, a people, a language, customs, scriptures, and so on. And all this nonsense about Muhammad initiating a movement all by himself because he heard some tales from Jews or Christians. It cannot be. It doesn't happen this way. It doesn't happen this way. The Arabs must have been Christianized before. They must have had ideas of the Messiah and so on. There is so much more at stake here than the proclamations and the actions of only one man.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's draw a line because I suspect you can keep going on this for a long time and we need to go home at some point. This morning I wasn't able to be here. I was doing a talk for some Christian international students, helping them to talk with their fellow students about Jesus, particularly Muslim students. And one of them came up to me. She was from West Africa, who has enjoyed your videos in various ways, and other people who haven't been here this week, and kind of sharing them with Muslim people. But what she said to me is, how do we use some of these things without coming across as arrogant and superior? And somebody else said to me today, how do we use these things, as well as obviously the gospel truth about Jesus, in a way that shows that we are humble and dependent on our Creator, rather than simply saying, gotcha, I've won. So just practically, how do we do this in a way that shows something of humility under our Lord, do you think?
Well, I suppose I'm learning from Bob to be a bit humbler, I suppose, but I would say use words like I think, based on the evidence, I believe, using those sort of words. I think that's probably, maybe I'll need to use that more often.
Yeah, thank you. Other thoughts on that?
Okay, I'll go. I see what you're getting at, and thanks, Rob, for bringing this up. I think what you're talking about is what methodology. How are we going to speak it out in public? And I think it depends on what venue you're doing this at. In a place like Speaker's Corner, like tomorrow, you need to have the gotcha, because that's what it's for. It's based on that. I do know that there's an awful lot of people that are actually getting up onto the internet and getting the gotcha. They want to shut down the person. Unfortunately, so much of it is attacking the person rather than really confronting the issue. And I think that's the difficulty I'm having with lots of the young men who are coming up in the next generation, the TikTok people and the YouTubers. Too much of it is personality based, and I think where's the gospel in that, and where's the person of Jesus Christ in that? We need to make sure that we don't use the gotcha on people like that, because it's not the person that's important. Because what you're putting up on TikTok, what you're putting up on YouTube will be there for centuries to come, and no one's going to know those people that you shut down. But they are going to listen to the debate on on the material that you're working on. So I think we need to be careful that we don't do that, because that's too easy, too quick, and you get a huge following if you do that, unfortunately. But remember, and maybe this is a way, the historical critique, one thing I love about the historical critique is for many people, we can use it and we can put it up there and we can have people then decipher it and take it out with them, and how they apply it to the person standing in front of them depends on who it is standing in front of you. If it's an academic, then you need to get to that level and go to that academic level. That's why it's good we had Bob here to hold us accountable to the weaknesses that we have in our argument. We need that. We need also other Christians to come up to us if we are using the gotcha. Stop us from using the gotcha. It's too easy, it's too quick to do, because it is so popularized especially amongst the people in the 20s and 30s of this generation that's coming up. I think we need to be careful as Christians that we do what Jesus did, because Jesus, I don't see him humiliating many people except for Pharisees. Did you notice that? He only humiliates Pharisees in Matthew 23. He doesn't humiliate the people on the streets. And we must not do that as well. When it comes to other academics, I think it's perfectly natural for us to confront them and hold them accountable. If you're saying to be timid and shy, you better be careful, because most Muslim cultures, you better not be timid and shy. It's the timid and shy that actually lose the debates for us. And that's why I like this next generation. I like the Bobs, and I like the Chris's, and I like the David that was sitting over here on 2 days ago. And I love the way that they aren't not timid and shy. Because for most Muslims, that's what they're looking for when they want to see a man of God. A man of God is someone who doesn't sit there and apologize. A man of God who knows exactly what he believes. And a man of God who goes toe-to-toe with their opponent. And a man of God is someone who exactly will die for what they believe. And I don't see enough amongst that in Christianity. That's not the gotcha. That's the passion of Jesus Christ. If we can be as passionate as they are without demeaning the person, I think we're going to win the argument. Because for right now, we have by far the best argument. We've never had this much good material. Not just the historical debate, not just the cultural debate, but also the internal debate and the traditional debate. These are going full tilt. Let's make sure that we follow the example of Jesus Christ and the way he used it.
Thank you. Now, like with the last two panels, coming to an end, and I'd like you each in 30 seconds to say one thing, either from this panel or from today, that you'd like us to go away with. So in 30 seconds, Chris, what one thing would you like us to go away with? Then Odon, then Bob, then round.
Yeah, we have the privilege of being able to accept either Jay or Bob and their perspectives and still come across with Islam being false. And that's an amazing position to be in. I think that there's a lot of, there's like a scale of things, right? I don't believe in the Mecca of the traditions. I don't believe that. I think, Jay, you've destroyed that completely. At the same time, I do also have enough sort of, I reserve the fact that maybe there's some person somewhere, or maybe it's more than one person. I'm open to that idea. But I think it's probably up north. I think that's better explained. I think scholars tend to be leaning more towards that as well. And I think we can reconcile this. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. 30 seconds, Odon. One thing for us to take away.
I think we came to understand that Islam is based on the false narrative. But the false narrative serves as a mask for a false expectation and a false salvation. And it's very, very interesting for us to dig into the narrative and so on, and to expose it. But we have also to work on the false expectations, the false salvation that Islam proposed to Muslims. And we as Christians, we who have the true salvation, we have to work on a proposition, a spiritual proposition to Muslims. Because right now the world is, the earth is crumbling under their feet. Yeah. There will be arguments about Mecca, about the Quran, about the Prophet, and there will be much more efficient year after year. Everything will crumble under their feet. So what do we have to propose them? Because otherwise they will fall into the traps of the world, progressism and all the other ideologies.
Thank you. Bob?
For all of you guys out there that watch this and are sat in the pews, I would encourage you just to stick to the historical criticism of knocking down the sin. And I would encourage you not to speculate any further than that and just be comfortable to say, we don't know what happened. For these guys on the panel, I would encourage you to organise a symposium where you try to knock down one another's ideas with deliberate tenacity. Because if you do that exercise, you'll strengthen your arguments. So try to find holes in your ideas. It was telling to me that when I mentioned about the tasfirs of the commentaries on the hadiths, Jay, all you did is come back with a question. And that shows to me that there's still avenues of research that need to be done to tighten the screws on your argument. I'm not against the historical critique. I just think we need to be very careful with it.
Thank you, Jay.
I think it's fascinating. A lot of the people that like the historical critique tend to be humanists and atheists. We're getting people coming to us all the time. Finally, you're using material that we can use. And I say to them, this is not for you. Please don't use it. Folks, this is something that we need to be using. Because when a humanist or an atheist uses this material, they shut down Muhammad, they shut down the Quran, and they shut down Mecca, but they have nothing to offer them. We are the only people that have a book and a man who have already passed this test. We are the only people that have had form criticism, source criticism, redacted criticism, all the textual criticism applied to our Bible, and we have shown that our Bible stands resolute above any other piece of literature. We are the only people that have an answer for this. We are the only people that can bring them home. Let's bring them home.
Great. Mel, your 30 seconds.
Okay, so my 30 seconds would be, I think the impression has got that you have to accept everything in the historical critique. Take something, it's Mecca, that's fine. Whatever part you take from this, good, use it. It's going to have an effect. And the other thing I would say is use all three, the internal, the cultural, and the external. And, they're not in competition. We might argue here, but we're not in competition. It's all for the same goal.
Thank you. And thank you all very much for what you've done this afternoon and over today and previous days. Let's give them a round of applause, please.